There is a specific kind of silence that exists at Horse Guards Parade on a Tuesday morning in October that you will not find anywhere else in London. Not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of a library where people are pretending to read. The silence of 2,000 years of institutional memory standing in a courtyard wearing a black helmet and refusing to blink. I have been to a lot of places. I have stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon and felt genuinely small. I have walked through Pompeii and felt the particular chill of a city that didn't know it was about to end. But nothing prepares you for the specific quality of stillness that a household cavalry mount produces when it is standing at attention in that archway on Whitehall, and you are standing 3 feet away from it, and it is looking at you the way a judge looks at someone who showed up to their own trial in flip-flops. The horse's name, I would later find out, was Perseus. Not that Perseus cared what I found out. Perseus had been doing this since before I knew what Horse Guards Parade was. Perseus had been doing this since before most of the people in that crowd had decided that London was a good idea for October half-term. I was standing to the left of the mounted sentry box in the approved tourist position, which is to say, behind the rope, phone out, trying to get a photo that didn't have someone else's elbow in it. Standard, fine, civilized. There were maybe 60, 70 people clustered around the archway. Families, school groups, a Japanese couple in matching rain jackets who had clearly done their research and were absolutely not going to touch anything. 2 French teenagers who were bored in the way that only French teenagers can be bored, like the entire physical world is slightly beneath them. A woman with a double pushchair who had somehow navigated the cobblestones of Whitehall without losing her mind, which meant she was already the most impressive person present. And then there was Marcus. I didn't know his name was Marcus yet. I would find that out later, from the crowd, in the way you find things out from crowds. Someone who knew someone who'd been standing next to him. A detail passed backwards like a game of telephone, until it reached me 3 people behind the rope, slightly to the right of a man eating a sausage roll at 9:45 in the morning. What I knew about Marcus at that point was this: baseball cap, University of Texas, backwards, white trainers that had never seen mud, the particular walk of a man who has never been told no by an architecture. He was reading the signs. I want to be clear about this because it matters. Marcus read the signs. I watched him do it. He stood in front of the notice that said, in plain English in letters large enough to be read from a moving vehicle, "Do not approach the horses." He looked at it. He nodded slightly, the way you nod at terms and conditions before you scroll past them. And then he turned back toward Perseus. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to tell you what Perseus is. Because if you have never stood next to a household cavalry horse, you may be operating under a misapprehension about what these animals are. You may be thinking, large horse. You may be thinking, decorative. You may be thinking, the horse equivalent of one of those cardboard cutouts outside souvenir shops, the ones tourists take photos with, the ones that do not move and do not have opinions. Perseus is not that. Perseus is 162 centimeters at the shoulder. Perseus weighs somewhere in the region of 550 kilograms. Perseus has been trained over several years at the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment's facility in Windsor to stand perfectly still in the presence of screaming crowds, marching bands, ceremonial cannons, and the full orchestral chaos of a state visit procession. Let me tell you what that training actually means. It means Perseus has been deliberately exposed to sudden loud noises until sudden loud noises are boring. It means Perseus has been walked through controlled chaos until chaos is simply weather. It means that when a tourist somewhere behind him drops a metal water bottle on cobblestones, as one did that morning, roughly 12 seconds before Marcus made his decision, Perseus does not move. Perseus does not startle. Perseus simply continues to exist, massively, in the way that mountains continue to exist when someone sneezes near them. That is what the training produces: stillness under pressure, equanimity in the face of human foolishness, a kind of deep geological patience. But, and this is the part the signs are trying to tell you, if you would read them with the portion of your brain responsible for self-preservation, rather than the portion responsible for content. Perseus is not a statue. Perseus is a highly trained military animal with 5 centuries of institutional role behind him, a nervous system, a flight response, and a very specific understanding of where his space ends and yours begins. The training does not remove the instincts. The training controls them. There is a difference, a significant one, the kind of difference that becomes relevant at very close range. The guard sitting on Perseus that morning, I would later learn his name was Trooper Davies. 2 years into his service, his 3rd rotation on public duty had also been trained. Same ethos, same institution, same deep load-bearing stillness. Trooper Davies was not decorative either. He was 23 years old, sitting absolutely motionless on a horse the size of a small car, wearing a polished steel helmet that had not moved a millimeter in 40 minutes, holding a sword he knew how to use, in a courtyard where every tourist with a phone was hopping he'd blink. He had not blinked. He was not going to blink. This is the thing that Marcus had apparently decided was an invitation. Marcus made his move at approximately 9:52 in the morning. I know the time because I had just checked my phone, mildly disappointed that it was not yet late enough to justify a coffee from the cafe on the other side of the courtyard. I looked up and Marcus was already past the rope. He didn't vault it. He didn't duck under it dramatically. He simply stepped over it with the casual confidence of a man who has decided that a rope is a suggestion rather than a boundary, which is a philosophical position that works considerably better in some contexts than others. The crowd noticed. Not loudly. The British portion of the crowd noticed in the British way a slight tightening, a collective intake that didn't quite become a gasp. Several people lowered their phones, which in 2024 is the body language equivalent of leaning forward. Marcus walked toward Perseus. Perseus watched him come. I want to linger on this for a moment because it is the detail that everyone who was there that morning kept returning to later, in the way you return to the specific image in a dream that you can't explain. Perseus watched Marcus approach with the expression, and yes, I am applying the word expression to a horse, and yes, I stand by it, of someone who has seen this particular movie before and already knows how it ends. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. The crowd went very still. He produced a sugar cube. There was a beat, one of those beats that expands in the middle like a held breath, where the entire courtyard seemed to be calculating what this meant and what was going to happen and whether this was actually fine, because he was offering food, not reaching for the bridle, not grabbing anything, just a sugar cube, just a tourist with a sugar cube. How bad could this be? Perseus turned his head, looked at the sugar cube, looked at Marcus, looked at the sugar cube again. Then Perseus sneezed. Not a delicate sneeze, not a polite, restrained, we are in public sneeze. A full-body, cavalry-grade, 550-kilogram sneeze that began somewhere in the enormous architecture of Perseus's chest and arrived at the outside world like a weather event. The sugar cube was gone. Marcus's University of Texas baseball cap was gone. Marcus's sunglasses, which had been resting on the brim of the hat, were gone. Marcus stood there, in front of Perseus, in front of Trooper Davies, in front of 60-odd tourists, several of whom were already filming, in front of all of Horse Guard's parade and the ghost of every cavalry officer who had ever ridden through that archway. He was hatless. Perseus resumed his previous expression, which was no expression, which was the most devastating expression available. Trooper Davies did not move, did not speak, did not blink. His face remained in the exact configuration it had been in for the previous 40 minutes, which was the face of a man performing a function that requires no acknowledgement of circuses. The crowd erupted. Not in anger, not in fear. In the specific way that crowds erupt when something happens that is funny and also slightly just, when the universe arranges itself into a shape that feels earned, that particular combination of laughter and relief, and the small, warm, slightly guilty pleasure of watching someone's overconfidence meet its exact consequence. Marcus retrieved his cap from the cobblestones. It had landed approximately 2 meters away, near the foot of a school group from Leeds, one of whom, a girl of about 10, in a yellow cagoule, picked it up without being asked, and handed it back to him with the solemnity of someone presenting evidence. He took it, put it back on his head backwards, because apparently the experience had not recalibrated him entirely. He looked at Perseus. Perseus looked back. This was not, I should be clear, the end of the incident. This was the end of Act 1 of the incident, because Marcus, having been sneezed on by a horse in front of 60 people and 2 centuries of institutional tradition, made a decision that should be studied in psychology courses as a case study in the ego's refusal to accept information. He reached into his other jacket pocket. Another sugar cube. The woman with the double pushchair standing to my left said something under her breath in a language I didn't catch, but the tone was universal. It was the tone of someone watching a person touch the same hot stove twice. Marcus held out the second sugar cube toward Perseus's nose. Perseus looked at it. Perseus looked at Marcus. Perseus stepped sideways. 1 step, deliberate, measured. Not aggressive. Perseus is not an aggressive horse. The household cavalry does not produce aggressive horses. Aggressive horses do not last in that regiment, but definitive. The kind of step that a very large, very calm animal takes when it has decided that it is going to reorganize the geometry of a situation on its own terms. The step put Perseus's shoulder directly into Marcus's outstretched arm. Marcus stumbled. Not fell, stumbled. The distinction matters because falling would have been a clean ending, a pratfall with a landing, and this was more interesting than that. This was Marcus stumbling backward, arms out, finding his feet, and arriving back at the rope he had crossed 8 minutes earlier from the inside facing out, looking at 60 people who were looking at him. The hat fell off again. The yellow cagoule girl from Leeds looked at it on the cobblestones. Looked at Marcus. Did not pick it up this time. Part 5. Here is the question that nobody standing in that courtyard asked out loud, but everyone was thinking. In the way you think things in crowds that you don't say, because saying them would make you the person who says them. Why does anyone do this? Not Marcus specifically. Marcus is a data point, not an anomaly. There is a Marcus at Horse Guards parade most days. There is a Marcus at the changing of the guard. There is a Marcus at every place on earth where a rule exists and a person exists who has decided, in the privacy of their own reasoning, that the rule is for other people. Why? The easy answer is ego. And the easy answer is not wrong. Marcus had the specific posture of a man who had decided that the photo was worth the risk, which is a calculation that requires you to believe, on some level, that the rule doesn't apply to you, that you are the interesting exception, that your sugar cube is different from every other sugar cube that has been confiscated, eaten, or sneezed across these cobblestones before yours. But ego is not the whole answer. The whole answer has something to do with what happens to authority when it is packaged as spectacle. When you take a soldier and put him in a ceremonial helmet and station him in a courtyard where tourists come specifically to photograph him, you have done something complicated to the nature of his authority. You have made it visible. You have made it photogenic. You have, whether you intended to or not, created the conditions under which a certain kind of person will look at that authority and think, this is performance, and performance is interactive. and I am part of the audience, which means I am also part of the show. This is the misapprehension that Horse Guards Parade produces in a specific category of visitor, and has been producing since the regiment was established in 1661. The show is not interactive. The show is not a show. Trooper Davies, sitting on Perseus for his fourth consecutive hour of public duty that morning, was not performing authority. He was exercising it, quietly, without acknowledgement, in the way that a load-bearing wall exercises its function, not by announcing itself, but by holding the weight. The Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment has been doing this, in some form, since Charles II reinstated the monarchy and decided that a visible mounted guard at the entrance to his private palace was both a security measure and a statement. The statement was, "This is real. The weight behind this is real. The history behind this is real." 360 years later, Trooper Davies is still making that statement, on a horse called Perseus, in a courtyard in Whitehall, to tourists who have come from Texas and Tokyo and Lyon, and leads to stand behind a rope and photograph, a tradition that has outlasted every empire that laughed at it. Marcus was not laughing anymore, standing on the outside of the rope with his cap in his hand, and approximately 4 minutes of viral footage already uploading from the phones of the people around him. There is a second question, quieter than the first one and more uncomfortable. Not why does Marcus do this, why do we watch? Why are there 37 videos on YouTube of tourists crossing the line at Horse Guards? Why do those videos have millions of views? Why was I, a 34-year-old travel journalist who absolutely knows better, watching Marcus step over that rope with the specific attention of someone who already knows this is going to be worth writing about? Because we want to see the rule tested. Not broken. Most of us don't want the rule broken. Most of us would be genuinely alarmed if something went seriously wrong, but tested, prodded, taken up to its edge and shown to be real. There is something in human nature that needs to watch authority prove itself, that needs to see the boundary hold, that needs the confirmation that the weight behind the wall is genuine and not decorative. Marcus was running that test on behalf of everyone standing behind the rope. Perseus passed. Trooper Davies passed. The hat failed. What does a moment like this leave behind? Not much on the surface. Marcus retrieved his cap, eventually, and disappeared into the crowd somewhere toward Whitehall, and by 10:15 the courtyard had returned to its regular configuration of tourists in silence and Trooper Davies not blinking. The yellow Kagul girl had moved on to examining the sentry box. The Japanese couple in matching rain jackets had gotten their photos and were consulting a guidebook with the focused energy of people who are going to see everything on their list. Perseus was back to being Perseus, still, immense, privately satisfied perhaps in whatever way a horse processes the resolution of an unwanted approach. His ears had returned to their forward-facing, neutral, this is fine position. His enormous jaw moved occasionally in the particular way of a horse that is thinking about nothing and everything simultaneously. Trooper Davies had not changed, would not change for another 40 minutes when the guard would be relieved and he would ride back through the archway and become, briefly, a person again. But here is what that moment did leave behind. The rope. Specifically, every person who had been standing behind the rope and watching Marcus cross it was now standing slightly further behind the rope than they had been before. Not dramatically, not consciously maybe. But the cobblestones where Marcus had been standing, in that gap between the rope and Perseus's shoulder, were now empty, and they stayed empty for the rest of the morning. And every new tourist who arrived and tried to edge toward that gap encountered the invisible pressure of 60 people who had watched what happened and had silently, collectively, moved back. This is how rules actually work when they work, not through signage, not through enforcement, though enforcement matters, through witnessed consequence, through the specific education of watching someone else's hat land 2 meters away on the cobblestones. The signs at Horse Guards say, "Do not approach the horses." They have been saying this for longer than most countries have been countries. They will keep saying it after everyone reading this sentence is gone. But on a Tuesday morning in October, Perseus said it better. Now the question is yours. Have you been to Horse Guards Parade? Have you stood behind that rope with your phone out, feeling the specific gravitational pull of wanting to get closer, wanting the better angle, wanting the shot that looks like you were right there? Have you edged toward the line without quite crossing it, and felt the version of Marcus that lives inside every person who has ever wanted something that a rope was preventing them from having? Or have you crossed it? We want to know. Not to judge, judging is easy, and easy is boring, and the truth is that the line between standing behind the rope and stepping over it is narrower than most of us would like to admit. It is mostly the line between a moment of wanting and a moment of deciding that wanting is enough justification. Marcus decided it was enough. Perseus disagreed. The hat paid the price. If you have a story from Horse Guards, from the Tower of London, from any place where authority and tourism have met and produced something worth remembering, leave it below. The best ones are never the ones where nothing happened. The best ones are the ones where someone learned something the loud way, in front of strangers on cobblestones, without their sunglasses. And if you have never been to Horse Guards Parade, go, stand behind the rope, look at the horse. Let the horse look back at you. Respect the line. Not because the sign says so. Because Perseus is watching. And Perseus does not forget a face.